There's a lot of attributes to farmers in Vermont that are tremendous. You know, stubborn is one, sometimes good or bad, but resilient. They figure things out, they find new ways to do things, and they get by.
Yeah, I'm too stubborn to quit.
You have to understand that within the last 20 years, maybe a little bit longer, we've lost 90% of the dairy farms in New England. That's a huge loss. And that milk is just coming in from the Midwest primarily right now.
The dairy industry in Vermont has gone through a lot of changes. I started working in the dairy industry in 1990, fresh out of grad school with the UVM extension, doing dairy herd management on farms in Grand Isle, Chittenden, and Franklin counties in Vermont. And at that point, there are right around 3,000 dairy farms in the state of Vermont. 20 years later, there's 1,007 active dairy farms in the state of Vermont. So that's a big change.
I think everybody understands that for our economy and for the culture of this state and for our need to get good, healthy food, it is absolutely essential that we maintain family-based dairy farms in the state of Vermont. And this is an issue we're working really, really hard on. It is not an easy issue because over the last 20 or 30 years, we have lost a very significant number of dairy farms.
Well, dairy farming in Vermont has been around a long time. It's the economic base for agriculture in the state. They've been producing dairy products in Vermont for decades. Well, dairy farms right now are kind of finishing out a really rugged economic cycle where the prices were down and the margin between the price and their feed supply was tight. And that put dairy farmers in a very difficult position for the last 2 years.
I happen to be the 7th generation of my family to operate the dairy farm, and with a 6-month-old son, he's the 8th generation. So that goes over quite a few years, and it has been an active dairy farm that entire time. Certainly has grown through the years to our current level of 165 milking registered Holsteins.
The Thomases started on this land in around 1850, and with a small farm operation, and we milked cows at that point. And in 1921, we started selling our milk, processing our milk and selling it retail. So we're coming up on our 90th year of retail sales. And so we milked the cows for about 150 years here, and then in 2005 we sold the cows, and now we just take our truck to neighboring farms and pick up their milk and process it and package it here and sell it.
The farm has been in the family since 1876, and we had cows up until 6 years ago, and then we got rid of the cows just because of the economics of farming.
Well, I believe that I think there's a lot of misperception about what's going on in the dairy industry. I think people feel like it's an act of God. It's like a glacier going down a mountain. You can't stop it. This is where it's headed, and it's too bad. It's too bad that these farmers are having their lives destroyed, but we really can't do anything about it, because I don't think very many people understand how the dairy industry functions, how milk is priced, and the role of the interesting role that the government and co-ops and farmers play working together.
Everything to do with producing milk, like everything else in the world, the expenses of producing it have gone up, as they should, or as you would expect them to, through the years and decades. But the pricing structure has allowed for farmers to take a smaller and smaller chunk of the retail price of the product, or the wholesale price of the product, steadily throughout that same time period.
This pricing system goes all the way back to 1937, so it's not a new system. People keep fixing it add a fix here, add a fix there, different policy, and so it's a real jumble of different ways to look at pricing milk.
The federal government sets the price of milk, and it's been a long time since the price of milk has kept up with the cost of production. They don't seem to. It's an antiquated process, and basically the little farms in Vermont are having to compete with the big factory farms out west, and they're getting the same amount for their milk.
In the last couple of years, you get paid a 1970s or 1980s type of pay price for your milk, and you have real 2010 prices of producing it. You know, costs of living go up. Your employees need to be paid the way they need to be paid to have their own lives, and equipment is incredibly expensive.
Yeah, and I mean that's the whole thing behind this whole operation. I mean, when we first did our milking parlor in 1965, we were state of the art. By the time we got done in 2003 or 4, somewhere in there, we were so antique. It was unbelievable as far as our methods. I mean, for us it worked, but they were really, and so if you wanted to upgrade, and it all comes into the factors. If you're going to upgrade, there's money involved.
Farmers on average are getting getting $5 less per hundredweight than what it costs to produce them. I've shown that to people and they go, oh yeah, well that's before subsidies. Or there's this assumption out there that farmers aren't really being subjected to this type of treatment, that, oh, farmers really are making money, they own all this land, and you know, they're just crybabies. But in reality, it's true. They're getting $5 less a hundredweight every time they sell 100 pounds of milk than what it costs to produce them. And there's no safety net. There's no subsidies. That's the support price. That's the bottom line. And it's a cruel system. You know, if there was just one person involved in the movement and pricing of milk that was on the dairy farmer's side, they could change things. But they're not. They're not on the dairy farmer's side. They're on the side of making milk cheap.
And then there's always the issue of the middleman. And then on a national scene, there's the issue about whether we should help the family farmers and with using tax dollars, essentially. I would say yes, that family farmers under Vermont are very much under attack. And we can see that those farms would be disappearing. And I can see that, you know, my office is going to be pretty busy trying to help these people.
I mean, I think it's the way things are going, whether it's good or bad, I do not know, but I mean, you lose a little bit every time you lose a little the dairy farm, and what the cost of doing business gets, it's like everything else. The smaller guy can't compete with the bigger guy, and it's, whether it's good or bad, I don't know, but that's definitely what happens.
I think the most dramatic change in Vermont agriculture has been the reduction in number of dairy farms across the state and the accompanying increase in size of farms. When I started here in Paulet, there was many times more farms than there are now. And the farms, you know, a big farm was 100 cows, and now the biggest farm in this area is probably 300 cows. And some parts of the state, it's 1,000 cows or better. And across the country, there are dairy herds of 40,000 cows. It's hard to believe.
It's very stressful, and it's very hard on the families themselves. You know, farmers, more than most businesses and people who are involved with their businesses, family farmers are very tied to the land. It means a lot to them. Many of these family farms have been in generations and generations and generations, and they really dread the time when they're not going to be able to pass their farm on to the next generation.
That was probably the biggest reason we decided to get out of it. There were no young Thomases coming up to take over that were interested. We hired an auctioneer to come, and we cleaned up all the cows and sold the cows, and then we sold all the equipment on the same day. I'm sure some family members felt different about it, but it had been such a tough situation for a number of years to keep the cows and to do a good job up there. I wasn't happy I thought we made the right decision. It was a business decision, and we probably waited maybe a couple of years too long as it was, but we made the right decision.
We got very fortunate. We didn't know what we were going to do when we'd made the decision to sell the cows, and I was in a conversation with somebody, and they said, "Oh, you're going to sell your cows?" And I said, "Yes." Well, there's a farm over here in South Londonderry that used to be the Janeway farm, and Barry Rowland had purchased the farm, and he wanted to have a working dairy farm, so they bought all our animals from the youngest right up to the oldest and started a brand new, they didn't start a brand new herd, but they started their brand new herd from our cows. The price of milk was basically the same price it was in 1980, and the price of grain was continually rising, and so we just started to look at the bottom line and said, it's time to change.
I had a guy call me the other day. This underlines the stress that's being created in the industry. I had a guy call me the other day who was from New York, and he wanted to do something desperately about the plight of dairy farmers because his neighbor the day before was a dairy farmer. I don't know how many cows he was milking, but anyway, he went down in the morning. He got up, and or sometime during that day, he went down to the barn, shot all his cows one by one, and then went back up to his house and shot himself. People just don't understand the level of frustration that you have as a dairy farmer when you work as hard as you do, try to do the right thing by your cows and your family, and the externals just continually get worse and worse and worse and worse. And I don't think it's not an act of God, it's not an act of nature, it's an act of man or people who just want to funnel the profits away from farmers to other segments of the industry.
They're working all the time on trying to figure out a way to control the milk prices so that you can know what you can predict something. In other words, you can say, okay, this is what my milk price is going to be, then I can go ahead and do this. But when it fluctuates anywhere from $20 a hundredweight down to 12 or 13, and you never know which way it is, it's awful hard to plan ahead.
So if they had a price, they could more, tighten up that range, not these giant highs and giant lows, but, try to take some of the volatility out of that price. One of the proposals is a growth management plan. So more predictability on how much milk is available versus the demand, and trying to bring those more into balance. The milk price really drops when supply exceeds demand. So if you got way too much milk, you've got all the fluid milk, you did the ice cream and the yogurt, you did the cheese, and what's left over is powder. But that really low price drags down the overall price to farmers. So how do you, that last bit of milk that's too much? And the other plan that's being proposed is called a marginal milk price. So that leftover, so to speak, milk that drags down the price, maybe farmers don't get paid anything for it. And that would be a big signal of, whoa, I'm making too much, I gotta back off.
Last year we were able to bring $350 million in emergency help to family-based dairy farms all over America, including the state of Vermont. It helped, but we've got to do a lot more. The concept that we're working on with the support of a lot of the farm organizations is supply management. And what supply management says is that we can't keep having the kind of volatility we have in dairy right now, where when farmers make money, they produce more and more. That drives the price down, and farmers are forced off the land. You need price stability. And what supply management is saying, okay, you're going to get a fair price for producing a certain amount of milk, not going up and not going down. And that's a concept that more and more family farmers are supporting. And we are going to introduce legislation to do just that.
One of the things we're trying to do is participate with the dairy farming community in forming a proposal to put to Congress that would be a whole new national dairy pricing policy. Now that's an initiative that's in part been led by Vermont dairy farmers, and we're working with them trying to figure out how to sharpen and tighten the specific proposal that would go to Congress. And if Congress would get one single proposal, it will increase the chances of that proposal being passed into law, and that proposal, if structured right, will be a very good benefit to farmers into the future.
Once in a while, we were able to reorganize a family farmer and keep them in business. There's been a move in the last 5 to 8 years for family farmers, dairy farmers, to try to move from the traditional kind of milk farming to organic farming. And there's a certain amount of expense for that, but generally they're generating more money for their milk, so it's giving them more of a chance to do that.
You know, there are people that have made a great deal of money farming organically. There are also people that have been led to believe that if they farm organically, that's it for them. That's their deal, and they wind up losing everything because the transition is terrible, and maybe they just weren't cut out for organic farming.
Diversification is clearly a movement that's happening in Vermont, and it's happening on farms and it's happening in agriculture generally speaking. We have a significant increase in energy, if you will, with new entrants into the field of agriculture. Some are dairy, some are other forms of non-dairy agriculture. And some of the dairy farmers we have are exercising that opportunity to diversify their income streams, everything from energy production to non-dairy products to other kinds of more dairy-related products. Artisan cheese is an example of one of the things that some dairy farmers are using as a different dairy product that they can manufacture and sell. And so there's as many new ideas out there as there are people, and there's a lot of people entering agriculture in the state of Vermont.
So you hear about the artisan cheese and the small-scale cheese makers. We're having an explosion in those. It's up over 40 now, farmers as well. So that's a really neat thing. It's a real connection right from the farm to the consumer. They're keeping milk on their farm, making cheese, and marketing that directly. So they're more in control of the price of that cheese that they can sell. I mean, if it's a good cheese and people really like it, then they can probably get an okay price for it that helps them pay their bills. And then some folks have come to this of, I really want to farm, or it's a second career. We have, a couple of lawyers in southern Vermont that got tired of their law careers, stopped, and now they milk cows and make great cheese.
Microdairies are a logical solution because you're not trapped all day with your cows. You have time for a day job. You're not creating lots of pollution with manure. You have the opportunity to treat your cows humanely, give them individual care. You have the time to keep the facility clean. You don't have a bunch of flies or odors, so it can fit right into a community. Our little dairy is right up in back of Royalton Village, and our neighbors love to see the cows on the land and see the pastures being reconditioned and the working landscape once again working. So it really fits, rather than the commercial dairy industry's trend, which is to create little industrial parks and isolate the farms from the community. That's why we have the tagline, bringing the cows back home, is because we want to bring the cows back into the communities and have them supply the communities that they're in with good fresh milk, and not put the milk on trucks, have it shipped to Boston, where processors can skim the profits and then load it back onto trucks and have it shipped back here where it's sold at retail. It just is a logical solution.
Our main form of diversification has been developing our registered cattle and breeding elite pedigreed cattle, which in turn potentially generate more money from a sales standpoint. So that's the sort of thing that allows us to diversify our farm income a little bit without drastically changing what we have to do on a daily basis. And we also make maple syrup and we do sell a little bit of sweet corn, but those are pretty small things that potentially in the future could become something that we did a little bit more of.
I don't think it's going to be a huge milk producing state. I think there's a lot of room for alternative farming, but maybe not huge dairy processing. I think there's a great opportunities for vegetables and alternative livestock.
Methane digesters, also known as biodigesters, which are used to manage and treat the manure and capture the methane that is naturally generated from cow manure, and then they capture that on the farm in a system that they then can burn that methane and produce power that can be consumed on the farm. And when they do it on a very large scale, they can even sell electricity to the grid. Why is that important? It's important for actually a number of reasons. One, it's important because it's a way to manage their manure and gain more value from the manure by producing electricity they can either sell or use on the farm. Two, it burns up a very potent greenhouse gas. Methane is over 20 times more potent than regular CO2. A third reason is that when they process this manure through a biodigester, they can pull out some of the solids, dry those solids out and use it as bedding so they can reduce their bedding costs.
I just think that it's important to understand where a hamburger comes from, where a glass of milk comes from. And I think that that's a really big problem, because if you don't understand where your food comes from, then you're not going to necessarily make good choices as far as what's really important. And I think that in society today, people are so hung up on cost. That's sometimes the only thing that people look at.
I believe dairy farming has got a very positive future in the state of Vermont. We're going to have to work at it. There are going to be challenges, but I'm confident with the kind of people we have in the dairy community, we can take on those challenges and seize those good opportunities. The public in Vermont has an enormously important role to play. The most obvious is just purchasing farm or agricultural products from their local farmers through CSAs and even in the grocery stores where Vermont products are sold, and even the big grocery stores like Shaw's and Hannaford's.
I think that the public has quite a bit on its own to deal with and to solve its own problems. But don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. That's the way to change the public, is to not only educate them, but to try to find solutions and work on bringing those solutions to the public so that they can understand it. And that's the way to kind of rally the troops.
May get by, but I wish, anything that we can do to make it not just getting by, but making a solid living is what's important.
They're going to have to adapt. They're going to have to do other things. I don't think that they can produce fluid milk and compete with these huge factory farms.
That there is no solution. There's no magical fix to everything. Part of what makes our country great is that you can do a variety of things and make a living doing it, and potentially make a lot of money doing it.
If they want dairy to stay in Vermont, we've got to figure out a system to do it, and if we don't hurry, it may be too late.